Good morning, everyone. So, as you know, you are working on social studies, and we're working on finding out about the system of slavery and how enslaved people resisted against slavery. So, we're going to go to our textbook, which we already know, and this screencast will be a read aloud of the book. So, as you're reading, you're going to be looking for information based on facts about slavery, slavery in the colonies, in the northern colonies, slavery in the southern colonies, what daily life was like, and resistance, how people fought back against slavery. So here is the textbook. Starting with the big picture. Here it goes. Slavery was not a new idea in the 1700s. It had been practiced all over the world for thousands of years. You read that the Aztec and the Maya practiced slavery. So did the Native Americans of what is now the United States. People in Europe, Africa, and Asia forced people to work as slaves. Some enslaved people were war prisoners. Slavery in the Americas was often based on skin color. Bought and sold as property, African captives had no rights. Even the children of captives belonged to the slave owners. Families were often separated and sold to different owners. Slave traders brought Africans to Brazil and the West Indies, as well as to the 13 colonies. However, most Africans brought to North America were sent to the southern colonies. Here they worked on plantations, or large farms that grew one crop, like a specialty of one crop. Here we go, slavery in the colonies. In the early 1700s, the colony's economy was growing, but people who worked for wages were scarce and expensive. Colonial shop owners, merchants, lawyers, and farmers instead bought enslaved people and hired indentured servants. There were only about 300 captives in Virginia in 1650. By 1751, only 21 years later, there were 2,000. In 1708, the number of enslaved people in the colonies reached 12,000. So the population of slaves, unfortunately, escalated quickly. In the North, the number of enslaved people in the North remained low. Most farms in New England and the middle colonies were not very large, so farmers did not need many workers. Most enslaved Africans in the North were servants or skilled workers. They often worked side by side with their owners, printers, sailmakers, carpenters, bakers, or innkeepers. In the South, plantations and small farms made up the largest part of the southern colony's economy. Most enslaved men, women, and children work on large plantations. Planters owned over half of the enslaved people since they needed them to tend important cash crops, like tobacco and rice. However, this was not true with others. Only about 1 out of every 4 whites owned slaves. To keep the enslaved workers under control, the planters made rules called slave codes. These rules took away rights that most free people in the colonies enjoyed. Enslaved people were not allowed to practice their own religion, not allowed to learn to read, to get married, or to own property. Think about this connection to human rights, obviously. This control of enslaved Africans spread throughout the South. In time, slave codes made it legal to treat enslaved people as if they were not equal to other colonists. Daily life on a plantation. A plantation was like a village. Often hundreds of people lived and worked on one plantation. The diagram on the next page shows how a plantation was set up. The center of the plantation was called the big house, where the planter and the planter's family lived. Many enslaved people worked in the big house as house slaves. All of them lived in small, often rundown cabins near the crop fields. This area was called Slave Row. You can see this in the picture. The big house, and then when you go down, see different parts of the plantation, which would be much bigger than this. The planter's life. Wealthy plantation families had many goods and products that most colonists could not afford. The big house had fine furniture from England, crystal glasses, china dishes, and silver platters. The planter held an important position. The courts, as well as government and business leaders, accepted the planter's view that the southern colonies' economy would weaken without slavery. Enslaved people's lives. The day began early and ended late for the enslaved. The overseer was the boss of the plantation. He told the enslaved people what work they would do. He was usually the one who punished them. The overseer was often an indentured servant or even an enslaved person. The overseer sometimes got a share of the plantation's profits, so money. So he pushed the field slaves to work hard from sunrise to sundown. If there was a full moon, enslaved people often worked in the crop fields at night too. Africans did the backbreaking work of planting and harvesting tobacco, rice, and indigo. They also cooked, cleaned, cared for animals, and repaired tools. Some Africans had learned skills in their homeland. These Africans used their skills to make furniture, shoes, or glass. Some built beautiful churches and other buildings. Some of these buildings still stand today. The plantation at night. Most people in the slavery said the day never really ended on the plantation. After working in the fields or in the big house, they had to do their own chores. They cooked, fed animals, cut firewood, and tended their own vegetable gardens. After supper, enslaved people finally got to rest. They were tired, but they made time to be with their families. Just as they had done in Africa, they told stories that would carry on their values and beliefs. People in slavery also enjoyed singing songs. Often these songs were a signal to meet secretly after work. It would be at these meetings that a number of them would plan their escape. Some secretly learned to read and would later write about their experiences. Struggling against slavery. Most enslaved people came from the present-day countries of Ghana and Nigeria in West Africa. They spoke different languages and had different cultures. The major ethnic groups from Nigeria were the Yoruba and the Hausa. The Fanti and the Ashanti came from Ghana. To keep them from talking to each other, slave traders and owners separated captives who spoke the same language. As Captain William Smith wrote in 1744, by having some of every sort on board, there will be no more likelihood of their succeeding in a plot. Still, enslaved people found ways to communicate with each other. Rebellion. Captives showed anger towards their slave owners in different ways. Many enslaved people refused to work. They often died before they could be conquered, wrote one visiting Englishman. Other captives worked slowly or purposely broke tools. Still others escaped. These were hunted down. When caught, they were usually beaten and sometimes killed. Even so, many tried to escape. The one thing the slave owners feared most was rebellion. Captives were willing to die for freedom. They rebelled by organizing raids, burning houses, and killing people. 30 colonists from South Carolina were killed in the Stoner Rebellion of 1739. To stop the rebellions by enslaved people, the planters made the slave codes even stronger. The family. Enslaved family members tried to keep in contact when they were separated. On the one day they did not have to work, parents visited their children. They often walked miles to see those who had been sold away from them. And we'll go back to why it matters and sum it up in a moment. Back to your note catcher. You should have notes about these focus areas, and you will be writing a paragraph about what was slavery, you need to add the why, and how did it work, and how did slaves resist against slavery. Thank you.